Well, the sun's shining, it seemed the perfect day to get my Elan out of the garage. And 2012 is going to be a really big year for the Lotus Elan, because remarkably this little car celebrates its 50th birthday this year. Came out in 1962 and caused a bit of a revolution at the time, because this was Colin Chapman's rethink on what a sports car should be. We had sort of E-types coming along. This went back to basics with a little engine, 1558cc, based on a sort of Cortina block and then a Lotus head on it, and it just ran rings around it. The handling of this car was a revolution, and it still is today. We tested this car against some modern day rivals like the Smart Roadster and things back in I think it was 2003, September 2003, and even then it did easily the fastest acceleration time and the fastest lap time against cars like the MR2. We had their MX-5 was there, which obviously is a sort of remake of this, Mazda's remake of this. But back at this particular example, the Sprint arrived in about 71, and this is a built 72 car, registered 73. And they were quick, these little things. This recorded, and we checked it back in 2003, 6.7 to 60 and 16 point something seconds to 100, and then a top speed of 123 when it just clatters into the rev limiter in fourth. That's really quick. 1558cc, remember. And its secret is it's tiny. It's impossibly narrow. I was looking at the figures, and it's 56 inches wide, this car, which makes it just over 1.5 metres. I mean, properly small. Nothing. We put a MX-5 beside this, and it looks enormous. But it's such a delicate little car, this, that you almost don't notice the sort of small dimensions of it, because it's all perfectly proportioned. But it's all there to make a really, really quick roadster. And we'll go out in a minute and just experience what it's like, because it's just superb down a sort of average sort of B road. But there's so many fundamentals that are right on this car, and I'll take you through some of them. Now, the first thing that obviously helps the handling on this car is impossibly light. It's 700 kilos, just over 700 kilos in this form, convertible form, which is really, really light when you consider that the engine produces 126 horsepower. It's a properly quick little car. But then I'll show you under the bonnet, which in true Colin Chapman style is dead easy to remove, with just one spring at the front, and hey presto, it just lifts away. But then just check out where this engine is in the chassis. It might only be 12 foot long, but the engine is actually all the way behind the front wheels, which is, you know, which we try and get on modern cars today, this front mid-engine style. Well, the little Lotus Elan was there in 1962, as you can see here. And actually, when you put a driver in and you weigh it again, it's one of those cars that's actually heavier on the rear wheels than on the front wheels. So its first major trick to handling is absolutely perfect weight distribution. The next trick this car has up its sleeve is its suspension, because in an age in the 60s when other cars like the MG Midgets were all running around on live axles, the little Lotus Elan had race spec suspension. It had these extraordinary length wishbones on each of the rear wheels, and that to get that wider wishbone in the chassis is really special on a tiny car like this, but it gives absolutely perfect wheel control with very minimal camber changes at the rear, and it's a really big trick of it. Unfortunately, it's one of its downsides, because I've never driven a car that handles so differently from one model to the other, and one of the things that happens with these very delicate wishbones is people try and jack up the rear wheel on here. That bends it and gives it toe out, and the handling goes completely to pot. But get a sorted one, and they're really, really special. And finally, we get to the size of the wheels and tyres on this car, which look pathetic. They look like space savers or something. They're 155 by 13s, tiny in this day and age of giant tyres, I'll show you in a moment. But sitting on 4.5-inch rims, it actually makes a really light combination. I'll put my hand over there. Look at the size of that. It is so small. And the first thing is I actually built this car in from a sort of rep car in 93, 94, and I thought, oh, they're much better on wider wheels. No, it wasn't. One of the secrets of Chapman was unsprung weight, this sort of engineering term. And if you've got a really light car, you need really, really light wheels and tyres to keep everything in balance. And that's why it rides so exquisitely and goes down the road like a scolded cat. I'll show you how ridiculous they are. Look, there's the Maserati wheel beside it. I mean, it looks as though I've nicked it off a tractor, doesn't it? It's a 285, I think. But have a look at the difference between those two. Absolutely remarkable. But also, just think how much that weighs compared to that little Lotus wheel. You can see this is a fairly well used example. I haven't really touched it since I built it in '93, but yeah, this one sits on twin 40 Delautos. There's obviously Webers as well, and he also got them with Strombergs, and they gave a little hump on the bonnet, and that was for the US market to meet emissions. Everybody thinks that sort of it's called the power bulge, and or it must be more powerful. It's not actually. The Strombergs, they do a reasonable job. They do more miles per gallon, but they're not really tunable like the 40s Weber or Delautos. Inside, really slick little cabin. Mine's slightly different from standard in that I had anything that was plastic trimmed in black leather, but I hope you can't really tell. Walnut dash. Complete mystery what half the switches do. Red lined at 6.5, this one, and then this exquisite little gear change, just straight into the gearbox. There's no change better than that on the Lotus Elan, and remarkably quite a lot of space in there. It's quite happy. I'm, as I say, 6'2" and fit in there no problem at all. Reasonable sized boot, so yeah, plenty of room in there. There we go. Next time we took it for a drive. Favourite little back ways into work. Almost feels like you're in a time warp, especially in a car like this. It does lead to one of my really nice driving road. When at low speeds you can feel it's got rubber donuts and suspension in the drive shaft. It's got something called wind up. It's very tricky to drive smoothly at low speed. It ends up doing that, and it's just the rubber in the drive shaft, so you have to be very gentle with the throttle and the clutch. So I think we call it character. Like an old Ferrari, it's got a dicky fuel gauge. Those tiny 155s, they just don't make sense when you're behind the wheels. You never think, oh, it's got a grip. It grips like there's no tomorrow. I wouldn't like to chase this car down a road like this in many cars and think, oh, I'll take that man. This one will just see anything off on a road like this. And it's 40 years old, this one, and came out 50 years ago. antique and they just expect it to perform like an antique. That's the last thing this thing is. It's a bit of a Cliff Richard of the car world that, yeah, it's 50 years old, dismissed, but he still goes strong. Perhaps Tom Jones is a better example. Having a lot of fun, but he's a bloody pensioner. That's what this car is. Lightweight. Naturally, heel and toe just comes completely naturally. Then we give it a moment's thought. It just power through the bed. So much grip available. To give you an idea how small this car is, I could quite happily open the door like that from the driver's seat. It's properly small, but as I say, there's nothing small about its performance. And going back to its day, an E-Type in 1970, Series 2 4.2 litre, that was about 7.6 to 60. This was a second quicker, the Little Elan Sprint. That must have been so annoying. It's only when they brought out the V12 E-Type they actually managed to match the Little Elan, when they could never match it through the corners. And that's the USP of an Elan, is just how it demolishes any sort of B-road. It's just brilliant.